Welcome to our new season of Thursdays with Third Path live podcasts. On every episode, you'll meet thought leaders, role models, and change agents connected to the Third Path community. We've got an exciting season planned, and we will be exploring why the new ideal employee is someone just like you, someone who wants to live an integrated life. And if you are inspired by what you see today and hear today, please share our podcast with someone you know and join us again next month. Very shortly, I'll be introducing our two guests, Ed Frauenheim and Paula Spann. But before I do that, let me provide a big picture of what we'll be discussing today. So, no big surprise, we really can see that flex and remote work is really helping with family well-being. And there are so many different ways flex and remote work help with family well-being. The ones we're really focusing on today is how it helps at every life stage, how it helps dads become more equal partners in family care, and how our experiences of managing this integrated solution and using flex and remote work, we get smarter every time we go through a new experience that then helps us be more prepared for the next time we need to use those experiences and tools. And, what we've always talked about on these Thursday webinars is that we all have a limited amount of energy. If you're a two-parent family or if you're a single-parent household, there's only so much time and energy we have in a day. But there can be many diverse ways we create an integrated solution. And that integrated solution means we have time for work, we have time for family life, and we have some time for recharge time. And what we've learned when you're following this integrated approach is that setting boundaries, whether that's around how much work we do or how much care we provide, helps us be able to find that right balance between work, family, and recharge time. And again, what we've seen over and over again is that flex and remote work helps families in so many different ways. It helps us build stronger relationships with our children, stronger relationships as a couple, a greater ability to manage change, more time for self-care, more time to connect as a family. And you're going to hear this theme over and over again today, because what we're looking at is how we can do care differently, how by bringing men into the equation of care work, it really changes the equation for everybody. But how it isn't just about caring for children, it's creating time for care across the life cycle. And so that's what I'm showing here is a little picture that if you're just listening to the audio, it shows that families keep on changing over the course of our careers. If we choose to have children, we start out in that new family stage. We're not getting much sleep. Can be a very challenging, but it's a very short period of time. Then for a number of years, we're in this, what I call the golden years, when we have young school-age children still looking up to us, thinking of us as these amazing people who they want to emulate. And you can really get into this nice rhythm with young school-age children. And if you've done that work of staying connected to your family and building that time for care work, then you get to the teenage years, and often they can be a lot of fun too. Children are supposed to become more independent, more, have their own ideas of what they want to do at that stage. But because you've built connection with those children as they've been growing up, the older school age years and teen years can really be quite delightful. But for those of you who are listening in with kids at home, the weird truth is eventually kids grow up and leave. If you're lucky, you stay connected to them in all kinds of ways. But it is not forever that we have children in our households. However, care work continues. Care work can continue because we end up with elder care issues or siblings who need care, or care work can continue because one day maybe we become a grandparent and we want to do care. And so really a big message today is we need to normalize that people who come to our workplaces also have care responsibilities. And we need to create workplaces that support people to do care. And one way to normalize that is to make sure we see it as something that all genders can do. Men and women, all genders can be involved with care work. And so no better than Ed Frauenheim to help us with that conversation. We've had him a number of times on our Thursday webinars, written a great book, Reinventing Masculinity, a father himself who's been experimenting with these issues personally. He'll be doing a great job around why including men in care work is so good for men, so good for women, so good for organizations. And Paula Spann. I am really thrilled to have Paula here. She has we just got connected recently, but she's been doing amazing work in this area for a long time. Please check out some of her columns in the New York Times. She's also written a great book that I'll be talking about today. It really helped me think about all that I've been going through around elder care. And you'll see that she brings in incredible expertise about that later career aging care and needs of our parents, our loved ones, and also the opportunity of grandparent care. So I'm really excited to have both of them joining us today. We've got everybody here with us. Welcome, welcome, Ed. Welcome, welcome, Paula. Really great to have you be here for this important discussion. I'm joking today that my background is stars because we have a new launch of our website that happened this month. And so if you haven't taken a look at our new website, please do, thirdpath.org. It's full of really good information about all the things that we'll be talking about with Ed and Paula today. I first want to start with you, Ed. You know, here you are, an expert on helping men think bigger about what's possible for their lives. You too have been on a journey around thinking differently about how to arrange work and life so that you can live that bigger life. What have you learned about men and care and why that's so important in the world, either from the work you've done in your book or your own personal journey?
Thanks, Jessica. It's really a treat to be here with you and with Paula as well, and all the guests here today. I would say that I've learned a couple things about men and caring, both from my research and from my own personal life. One of the biggest ones is that men can love caring. Men are carers. We have that deep within us as human beings, but we often have been told, according to these traditions of what we call in our book confined masculinity, that it's not really men's role to be caregivers, care partners for kids or elders, that our role is to be providers, protectors, procreators, and not really so much the folks that actually do the physical and emotional labor of raising kids or caring for elders. And what I have learned in my own life is that it is a gift to be a caregiver. My wife and I consciously wanted to be equal partners in raising our two kids. That didn't actually work out as we planned, because I ended up being much more the breadwinner of our family. My wife's an artist, an amazing artist, but not necessarily a very lucrative career for her. And yet I did find great job arrangements so that I did have a fair amount of flexibility, as you talked about, so I did have a fair amount of caregiving duties with my two kids. And I will say one interesting element of that was that it not only made me feel more fulfilled as a person and as a father to be spending a lot of time with my kids, being their soccer coach and baseball coach for many years, 8 years straight. I was a coach for my two kids. But I also, applied what I learned at home at work. And in particular, I have a very headstrong youngest child. She is born female, recently decided to define herself as non-binary. So for a while I was calling her my very strong-willed daughter, and we butted heads a lot. And I ended up having to really come to trust her that she was gonna, turn out to be a good person, because there are times that I felt like she would not, cooperate or be very, surly. And I had to apply a level of trust that was actually very fitting for the work I was doing at Great Place to Work, the consulting organization behind the Fortune 100 Best list. And we were talking about the idea of a trust mindset as a concept. We talked about in a book, and we talked about in our conferences. And I would tell stories at Great Place to Work conferences about raising Skyla, my youngest child, and how I had to practice this. And when I did, good things happened. And so I could say with some conviction that if we can treat our employees with more trust, have a trust mindset, just like I was practicing as a father, the results were positive. And we saw this in our research too, but I had this great kind of personal anecdote that I could share. So I'll say that on a personal level, this has definitely been meaningful for me to have a more fulfilling life, to be an active caregiver. And there's a bunch of research on this too that I could share later, but I'll stop for here and let you take things where you would like to go next.
Well, that actually was a good lead in to, I think that's what's so fun about this work, is that it's not just good for men, it's good for our workplaces. And so what you just touched on is the idea that there's these skills we can develop in either arena that helps us become smarter in the other one. And I always use the line someone told me years ago about, she learned her best negotiation skills at the dinner table with her teenagers. And so, but there's just so many. I mean, I love that, and what we've learned from the pandemic is we need more empathetic managers. And so we're better to learn empathy and that kind of emotional intelligence than being a good parent. And so how do our workplaces gain from, we're basically saying, hey, we're workplaces, we need men to be able to stay home with a sick kid like mothers or other people have done. And we need men to be able to leave and be home after school. And we need, men to help out with summer care. Why does our workplace want to have that happen?
I think there are two big reasons that strike me, Jessica, for that. The benefit to workplaces that make space for caring for men as well as women and all genders, as you put it. First is, as you just mentioned, you end up being a better leader when you are a skilled and practiced caregiver. That's because you do practice understanding emotional needs and improving your emotional intelligence, your compassion, your ability to stay calm amidst strife, and temper tantrums. And so one of the things we found at Great Place to Work and research on the most effective and inclusive leaders is that they were very good at building trusting bonds with their teammates, their team members. And so that was a skill that does take listening. It takes emotional empathy. It takes the ability to take the time to not necessarily just talk about the work task, but to understand what else is going on in their life, to see people holistically, which is what you need to do as a good parent, a good caregiver. And I would say the second big reason, besides the idea of more effective performance at work, effective leadership in particular, is that you're going to retain great people. If you want to have a workforce that's going to have awesome employees, it's increasingly important to make caring a possibility for your employees of all genders. And we see this in the research in terms of younger men being more interested in parental leave policies and parental leave benefits. And Jessica, you and I wrote in our recent article about how during the pandemic, men started changing their identities around caregiving. That given that they were home because of company lockdowns and remote work arrangements, there was some interesting research that found that men were taking on more active parenting roles, and they were loving it. And they don't want to change. So that's something that companies have got to address by saying, all right, we're going to make space for that. And we know that that's possible in some of the other research. You've talked about Alex Pang's book about Shorter. Like, we can make this work for people to have greater caring obligations and make work more flexible for the employees who are going to be carers. So if you want to have the strongest workforce, if you want to retain great people, increasingly, you've got to make space for them to be carers.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And I would add two more. I think that when I think about someone, whoever you are living an integrated life, back to that boundary concept, we can't do everything. Our organizations can't do everything. And if we as employees and we as managers know that in our hearts, we get better and better at doing the right things, making the tough choice of what can we do, and focusing on the most important work, and then getting smart about saying no or go slow to other things. And that's just something you have to learn as an integrated person. So I think setting limits is something you do every day if you're an integrated person, and our organizations really benefit when people get smart about that. I also think you have to manage change all the time, because you're constantly, your life is changing. And guess what? That's our world today. And so you have this natural place where your employees are learning how to manage change. And that is the truth of who our world is and our workplaces are today. The list could go on and on. Ed, we don't have time to go into it in a big way, but women benefit from men playing a bigger role in care. Do you have something you want to share about why that is so true, or an obstacle around that, around the role of women can play in increasing men's care? Any thoughts about that? We'll circle back to that later too, if you don't have a thought right now.
Well, one thought I have about that, Jessica, is that, I think the most obvious point there is that women have a lesser burden if men are, shouldering part of the load. I want to make the point also, though, or, to point out that women play a role in men being liberated, if you will, or freed of those confined masculine norms, if they can honor and make space for men who are going to do that. Because I think they're, both men and women are affected by this, our attitudes around gender roles, what we would call confined masculinity. And it's something that, it's men's work to liberate themselves. And as we put in our book, to embrace a liberating masculinity, to become more compassionate and connected. But it can really help if women can send signals that they welcome that change, and don't, for example, make fun of a guy that might be more emotionally expressive, or that may be saying, I'd like to share the breadwinning duties with you, and not to say, well, why aren't you a real man? There's a lot of signals that can be sent, even inadvertently, by women. But again, this is, I don't want to blame women for men not being what they should be, but I think they play an important role in facilitating men getting to that better place. Ultimately, that does benefit women when there's more equal partnership and caregiving.
Yeah. Thank you for saying all that. And there's an example you've heard me say before. It means, for example, if Jeff and I really wanted to share care with our young children, when my mother-in-law was visiting that one time and my son as a toddler fell down, but Jeff was in charge of his care at that moment, if I sweep in and care for my son when he's hurt, because I'm feeling like I'm being judged as a woman at that moment, I'm interrupting our goal of expanding Jeff's role, expanding my mother-in-law's understanding of what men can do, expanding my son's experience, who is now 26, of what men and women do. I raised that because what I saw in my own life is the experiences Jeff and I had sharing the care of our children directly connected to our ability to think smarter around elder care. And that's where we're going to introduce Paula, because what I saw was my husband had become as equally skilled at saying, hey, I can do work differently. I can do care differently. And so along comes, we had 4 healthy, aging parents, Paula, only 8 years ago. And I only have 1 parent now, because that's what happens.
That's what happens.
And so there was a lot of change, a lot of painful change, a lot of uncertainty in that change, because each elder care story is a snowflake. It's going to be different from the next one. And so over an 8-year period, Jeff and I faced a lot of challenges around elder care, and he was my equal partner. And what that meant was, too often, partly because of what men do, partly because of what women do, partly because of our workplaces, women end up doing elder care in a substantially bigger way than men. And so what Jeff and I invested in early in our relationship paid off big time when we hit this 8-year span of time of managing elder care. What do you think about that, Paula? Is that sounding like something you've seen in others' families? Or
well, there are ways in which learning to be a caregiver and learning to share the caregiving burden, I will use that term, it's difficult, will pay off later, because these are recurring cycles. So, and not everybody is a parent, but almost everybody has parents, and will have to step into that role. So if you already have figured out certain ways to be flexible, certain ways to pass off care to one another, and very importantly, you have an employer or an employment situation that recognizes this, then when elder care comes up, it feels somewhat familiar. Now, I will say that these are different, and employers need to recognize this. Childcare, aside from, the childhood colds and illnesses, if you have, a basically healthy kid, childcare is predictable. You need daycare for 3 years or 4 years, then you need after school care, you always need summer care, and then if you're lucky, your kid gets older and moves on. At elder care, you might not really benefit from a 3-month or 4-month or 6-month leave, because it can go on for years. It might work better for you to be able to take a day when needed to take your parent or older relative to a doctor's appointment. And then you might not need to be off work again for a couple of weeks, or you might need 2 weeks or 3 weeks when someone's coming out of a hospital and you need to kind of get them set up at home, get some home care going, make the home safe for them to use. And then if you're lucky, you can go back to work. And so they don't work exactly the same way. And I will also say that we shouldn't forget about the fact that there are people who are caregivers to spouses, to young adults who are disabled, and they can be any age at all. And that's, the least predictable and oftentimes most difficult part of caregiving. So yes, there's childcare, there's elder care, there's care for your children or your spouse at any age. And then again, if you're lucky, and I feel lucky to be a grandparent, there's grandparent care, which is the best personally, because you get to give that being, that wonderful being that you are caring for, back to its parents at the end of the day. And don't we wish we had all had that possibility when we were parents? No, there's no one else. It's just us. I like to say that the baby boomers will recognize this song, that when it comes to caregiving in this country particularly, our theme song should be "Baby, It's You." It's not the government. It's not, some agency. Like, baby, it's you, and you have to figure out how to handle it. And it does change. And yet I often hear, even when we're talking about elder care, which can last longer than really dependent childcare, it can go on for years. And I often say that I rarely hear people say, I don't want to do this. I never signed up for this. Like, no, people feel that they want to take care of their parents and their siblings and elder relatives. And I just don't hear people saying, no, forget it. This is someone else's problem, not mine. But I frequently hear people saying, I just can't do this on my own. I need help. I need support. I need information. Like, we're not prepared for this often when it comes. We read endless books about how to be parents. We tend to be taken by surprise when our parents need help, because somehow they were always there for us, chugging along like the Energizer Bunny. And we think they're always going to do that. And when they don't, there's a fair amount of panic and, oh my God, moments where you suddenly realize Medicare's not taking care of this. Medicaid's probably not taking care of this. Baby, it's you.
Yeah, no, thank you for all of that. And thank you I want to underscore a number of things that Paula said. One is that sometimes it's, just slow change, modifications, helping out with this and that. And then along comes the unexpected crisis. And that very truth of how each elder care or aging person or person that you're caring for situation can be its own unique story and keep on changing. And sometimes the unexpected crisis will happen. That just makes it so different when you're trying to balance work and these care responsibilities than with young children. Right. And certainly something what I've seen over and over again in my own life. But I want to underscore something else Paula said, because I want to expand on it. You talked about how caregiving in fact, in your book, she has many different things that you can read from Paula that are all wonderful. The one thing that I spent some time reading was a book she wrote called When the Time Comes, Families with Aging Parents Share Their Struggles and Solutions. It's a great book because to me, it felt like it was providing a simple outline of like how things might shift over time, starting maybe with home care. Then, they stay in their own home and they're able to care there. Maybe they move into your household, or maybe they don't. Maybe they move on to assisted living. Nursing homes, hospice care. It kind of shows you over the care cycle what's going to happen in that book. But in it, she talks about this concept of caregiver gains. And I'm going to read a quote from one of the researchers who found this concept of caregiver gains. When you're listening to this quote, I'd even expand it, Paula, to not just about elder care or any care of other aging people that you care about. I'd expand it to what Ed and I were talking about, care in general. Quote says that we really gain something from care: pride in being able to meet the challenges, feelings of competence and mastery, a sense of meaning and purpose. The role's enjoyable aspects can coexist with its pressures. They include closer family relationships, warmth and intimacy, feeling of satisfaction, and even joy. And I think that's what I see in the Third Path community, whether that's working that 4-day work week so that you can have that day with your kids, or what Jeff and I did when our kids were school age, take turns who's in charge after school, or as you heard me talk about, share in the elder care of our parents. There is incredible joy and pride from this activity. I know I'm saying something you think about all the time, Paula, but anything you want to expand on that?
No, I think that's true. And both of these things can be true for elder care in particular. It can be draining. It can go on for years. It can be a difficult thing to do. And I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it and say, we can all figure this out. And that's particularly true if you're also trying to earn a living. But it can also, I've often heard people talk about how they got closer to their parents who had always been so independent and maybe a little judgmental, and who they felt needed, they felt able to give their last year's pleasure and meaning. It's certainly true with grandparenting that not only do you get to spend time with a 6-year-old again, but you get to support your son or daughter who is also trying to parent and work. These are the ways that families across history and across cultures have always been connected, have always cared for each other. And I think we're there are exceptions, but I think we're mostly wired to want to do that. The difficulty, I think, is often not our intentions. The difficulty is the need for institutional support.
Yeah, well, that is a great setup for where I want us to go next, because I want to use some of today's conversation to really think big about this. If what we've learned today so far is that people of all genders across the life cycle want to be involved with care work and also need a break from care work and support around care work. What does this look like for the future? What could we really be thinking bigger around this? And I want to give us a couple more concepts to think about to help us with this conversation. Okay, so what I did to prepare for this part of the discussion was go back to that book. We've had Alex paying on a couple of times on our Thursday webinars, the book Shorter. And I looked up a case study where he talked about a retirement community in Virginia that was experimenting with a shorter work week. And the way they approached this concept is they said, hey, if we offer our nursing assistants who are punctual and can stick to their regular schedule, 40 hours of pay for 30 hours of work, how will it improve things at our retirement community? Would this be worthwhile? There was a bit of a cost involved for them to make this change, 15% increase in costs. But the question on the table was, but will there be some benefits to make this change. And I'm going to explain why I'm bringing up this case study in a second. So what they found was when they supported these nursing assistants to be able to have this opportunity, that there was quicker response time to their clients, less falls and skin tears. Anybody who knows about aging, less falls and skin tears is a huge, important improvement. Less psychoactive medication, that also is a huge improvement. Increased applicants, 44%. Less turnover, 128%. And so what they saw in this very concrete case study is when they supported those people providing care, more time for their lives, more time for their own care needs, everybody benefited. Are we surprised? No, we're not. In fact, what I'm trying to get at, and what I'm going to have Ed and Paula talk with me about in a second, is that for too long, we've seen this very work or care mindset be the dominant mindset of how we approach the work world. You're expected to show up at work, get your work done as the parent, and then have somebody else provide care while you're doing this standard work week, whether you're doing it remotely or whether you're doing it on site or whether you're doing hybrid. You're showing up for your 40-hour work week and you are, having somebody else provide the care. And what we're trying to say today is, wait a minute, there's a different way of thinking about this. If we started imagining and normalizing that across the life cycle, all genders want to and are capable of and live better lives from providing some of the care, they can then participate in that care, flex their work around those care needs, if the workplaces support a more flexible approach. And just like we saw in Alex Peng's case study, it also means child care workers have more time and energy, that 4-day work week, for example, for their own lives. So instead of us building care on the backs of child care workers or elder cares, we are recognizing child care workers and elder care workers have care needs themselves. And we're trying to imagine a whole new mindset where we think about people coming to all kinds of work as whole people with care needs. And by the way, just one more thing to think about. Those child care workers and elder care workers are often women of color. And so if we start changing this equation and we bring men into care work, they are workers who also do care. I think gives me hope that we can change the equation of who does care work and change our assumptions around in all departments. Who does care work at home? What a worker looks like at a workplace, and who helps us provide that support of care that we're going to need in addition to the care we do ourselves. So this is a big concept I'm trying to help us think about today. You guys who are listening in, this is the first time that we've actually tried to talk about this today. I'm really lucky to have Ed and Paula help me do a better job of explaining what I'm trying to talk about today. Maybe I'll start with Ed, and then I really want to hear from Paula.
Sure.
So you're seeing what I'm trying to talk about. When we include men and make it normal for them to be part of the care equation at their workplaces, we are also perhaps changing the expectation that when we walk into a child care facility, that we see a man providing care there. We're changing the equation that when we walk into an assisted living place, that we see men involved with care work there. We've seen already some changes around men and nursing. Do you see this connection between all these things? And will this be a good thing for men to have this change happen?
I do, and I think yes. I have actually spent a little bit of time recently in Paula's territory. You might say I've been looking into dementia care in particular, and have been visited a facility in North Carolina, a dementia care unit, and was really struck by some of the caregiving men there, care partners who were men, and showing how to bring a masculine energy, the importance of physical strength to helping people move around and sit down or stand up in this gentle but powerful way. And so I think, and I know that it was some of the in our book we talk about a guy that really was drawn to be a nurse, but for many years didn't feel like he was sanctioned by society to become a nurse. And as he joined a men's group that was freeing him up to think differently about how to be a man, he became a very valuable nurse and started changing the culture of cynicism within an ER that he worked at. So there's a lot of really positive things that can happen there. And I love this model you just put up there, Jessica, because I think it is possible for us to get this new mindset, a whole new mindset that is holistic, where we start seeing ourselves as human beings, not robots at work. Because that's kind of been the model, this hyper masculine model that is, said all emotions and identities outside of being kind of a generator of products and productivity, those don't count. But now I think the pandemic, as we put it in this article we put recently, has cracked things open. And a lot of male executives leaned into, our people are dealing with mental health issues. I am dealing with mental health issues. They were more vulnerable and open about declaring their stress or their depression or their anxiety. And I think this is a moment where we can start developing that new mindset, starting off and at the top, where men of these hyper-masculine workplace cultures are saying, let's widen how we can be. Let's expand the horizons for what it means to be an employee. This new ideal employee you talked about that includes the option and the need to be a carer besides an employee.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Well said. Well said. Paula, when you hear all of this, what would you add?
I would add, so my constant theme is, good intentions need institutional support. So there are at least two workplaces we're talking about here. There's our own workplaces where we're trying to make a living. And then with elder care, particularly 2/3 of older Americans will need long-term care, which means help with the basic activities of daily living. And most of it actually will come from families, but a lot of it will also come from different kinds of hired caregivers, home care workers, the staff at assisted living, the staff at nursing homes, the staff at adult day centers, which I think are, vastly overlooked. And so there are workplace issues for these workers too. And as you said, they are predominantly female, heavily immigrant. These are not well-paid jobs. There is a fairly high injury rate. A significant portion of people who provide home care need food stamps or housing subsidies themselves. And so one consequence of the turnover is always enormously high, over 100% in many assisted living or nursing homes. People just leave. And one consequence of the pandemic is that when wages went up for other kinds of low barrier to entry jobs, fast food, restaurants, hospitalities, retail, when you could get $15 an hour at Chick-fil-A, you are much less likely to work in a nursing home for $15 an hour. It's just simpler. So we need to think about our own workplaces and how to make them flexible. And then we also need to think about the workplaces for the people that we want to hire. And so there's a role there for those employers. There's a role for unions. There's a role for government in helping to make it possible for family to be compensated for care, to get Social Security credit for the years or months that you spend caring and you can't add those quarters to your Social Security benefits, for government to connect people who want to hire with people who need the work, so that the agencies, which I'm not calling for their abolition, but they do take half of everything that you pay your care worker. And maybe if you could connect with that person directly through a state agency, which do exist in some states, and the state vetted that person, did the background checks, made sure that they were who they said and could do what they did, then when you give that person $20, she gets $20 and not 10. So there are many moving parts here. And yet there are groups and individuals who are working on all of these frontiers. So it's slow, it's hard. There was a fair amount of support for family caregivers and for paid caregivers in some of the early Biden administration plans that got stopped in the Senate by Republicans and never got into law. But it is a much more discussed issue now than 12 or 13 years ago when I wrote that book.
Yeah. Thank you for that really excellent summary of the multiple layers of challenges to make some changes here. No surprise, given your background, the expertise you bring to this conversation. And, what I really hear is that, and maybe I'm being naive when I say this, a huge shift in all of this thinking, getting politicians to think differently, getting people who run those organizations to think differently is also partly coming from valuing care differently. And when we include men in valuing care, it shifts the equation. It's no longer seen as women's work. And
no question. Yeah. No question.
And so to me, it just this is why was so excited to have both of you on today's webinar, because this is how we get this new mindset. We get men involved with care early on, and it's what they want in their own lives, and it helps them create that different workplace. If you guys went and got the copy of The Third Path Leader, one of the stories in it is about Ivan, who wanted to care for his grandchild, just like Paula, and ended up being able to do a compressed work week. He's part of 7 people running his organization, and he became the model for how to work more flexibly when the pandemic hit. Right. And so it's all connected to get to this new mindset. And again, back to what you said about, it's about the workplaces of the caregivers. That's why I love that case study of Alex Pang. Somebody in that organization said, we could offer a shorter work week, and that would make it more sustainable for people to stay. They changed they did not have that high turnover. They really changed the turnover problem. So it's putting all these pieces together. There's lots more to say. Paula, as you're listening in again, what do you think would be, to our listeners today, what's an important takeaway for them as they're trying to think ahead about some of the care needs that they have? And by the way, somebody listening in today is pointing out just what you talked about. It's not just elder care. You could have somebody you could have a sibling you've been caring for all your life. You could have, there's just care comes in all different kinds of styles and needs. Right. What advice would you have for some people as they're thinking about this today?
I think it takes a brave individual to say to an employer, I need time to do this. It's not part of our model, but can I do this? I hesitate to say, yeah, you be the one who stands up and makes this case. I think we need I'm going to sound like Pete Seeger here, but we need to organize. And that means, groups at work, talking about shared problems and thinking about solutions and presenting them to management. I think unions can play a role here because unions do not organize only for more money, though that's always nice, but for other parts of work that need attention. I think we need collective solutions. That also means government. So when you have to wait to have your terminally ill parent admitted to a hospice because they cannot get the staff, we are at a crisis point. So in terms of bringing more people into care work as paid workers, making it possible for family caregivers, and we're defining family more broadly, making it possible for them to do this work. and finding ways for government to support family. I'm not brave enough to do it alone, and I don't think I can ask other people to do it too. I think you need to find ways in your workplace, through your union, through government, through your community, through your town, to start an adult day center, to provide elder transportation. These all are or should be group projects.
Amen. Amen. I think that this is I'm going to sound like a both and, but I want to underscore Paula's point. And if Alex Payne was on today's webinar, he'd say to you, Paula, the way that people moved to a 4-day work week is because it was a collective action and was much more successful as a collective action.
Right.
That said, it's so interesting the way Third Path has been growing a group of leaders who are doing things differently way before the pandemic was because of the bold moves of some people to go ahead and try to do something different, despite what they saw around them. Right. And so I think we're learning this both and. We need absolutely what Paula is saying, this collective action. Please, let's commit to the collective action. And thank you for all of you who've been those bold pioneers trying something different, and showing us that we can do something different, because we don't want to wait around for government to change when it's been so frickin' slow to change. Ed, as you listen into this conversation, what advice do you have for men around what we've been talking about today?
I would say to lean into caring. And I love that quote that you referenced from Paula's book, I think, about the gains of caregiving. Another term that came up from my partner in this dementia care effort is to really call the work of dementia care sacred. And I think there's a spiritual richness that's possible through caregiving, care partnering, that men miss out on if we don't move into this fuller way of being a human being. And I love what Paula is saying about the institutional supports needed. And I'm also hopeful that there's more and more evidence that the organizations that do make space for this are winning in the capitalist economy. Those high road organizations, we've studied, I've been part of some articles and research on senior living facilities, and the ones that have the highest employee experience scores on the Great Place to Work survey, they have the highest care ratings, and that leads to better business. So it's partly about telling the story better too, along with the sort of organizational work Paula says. But at that individual level, I would urge men to find a way to begin to care more. And, find ways to care for your kid, your parent, your spouse, your community, because even if it's a little uncomfortable at first, it has a lot of payoff. It has the payoff of a richer, fuller, more soulful life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting to listen to your story. Reminded me of something else that's about the full circle that we've been talking about today around care. My mother-in-law had dementia the last few years, and it is both what Paula's talked about, very difficult, hard work, and spiritual. And actually, she played an incredible role with our kids when they were little, and now she had dementia, and both of my kids stepped up and played a care role with her. And honestly, they were better at it than I was. And I think it's just, wow, talk about full circle, learning to be cared for and care, which is kind of amazing. I want to put up a couple of last concepts. Paula, there might be something you're dying to say first.
Well, I just wondered if Ed remembers when maternity leave became parental leave. So we're going back decades, and it was unpaid, and it still is in many places. But I remember doing these stories about how men would not take this leave. It was legally available to them, but it was so frowned on in corporate cultures that they would take a week off and go back to work as if nothing had happened, because that was what was expected. And I hear more and more now of new fathers taking 2 months, 3 months, whatever they can get, and the couple together, if there is a couple, managing the first 6 months or longer, just like in other countries. This is not impossible. You get a year off in any Scandinavian country. It's not some, complete fantasy. But I see that change, and I imagine you do too.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what we've been talking about, is how all of this is connected. We can do work differently. We can create that 40-hour pay for 30-hour work week and have better results at our workplaces. We can do care differently. We can, right from the start, have men, people of all genders, be involved with care work, normalize that that's part of being a human being. And most importantly, what we've seen at Third Path is when we get leaders to think about this and model this in their own lives, they're very motivated to make change for the whole organization. And I really do think we can create better workplaces. And that case study today really showed it very well. And what we've been talking about all year long is that there are skills people learn when they live this integrated approach. And these skills are so beneficial to workplaces, not just to our lives. And you can learn about more of these from our previous webinars that we've been having this year. And that, in general, we want you to continue the conversation with us. Join us on our Trailblazers group. Follow us on social media. We really want to keep having you be part of this conversation. And don't forget, we are a nonprofit. And as you can see, our nonprofit has been successfully building a community of role models and change agents. Please help us continue this work and support our free resources like these Thursdays with Third Path podcasts by making a small annual or monthly donation. I want to thank you both for being here. This is the kind of discussion I was hoping to have, really helping us expand our thinking about what's possible for the future generations of families, of workers, of workplaces. Paula, do you have a last thought that you want to share with our audience today?
I'm grateful for the conversation. I found it really interesting. I guess just as a parting shot, compared to parents, I think elder care, family caregivers feel unseen and unheralded. And so I'm just going to remind us all that the majority of older people in America in the United States who need care are not getting it from any paid source or any government agency. They're getting it from their families. And it's a hard role. Even with all of our help, I don't think we ever make it simple. So I'm just going to applaud family caregivers and say thank you, because when we talk about elder care in this country, we are talking about families.
Yeah. And Paula, I want to underscore that. I'm actually going to take that with me going forward. We need to make it more visible at our workplaces, right? We need people to understand, because flexibility is so essential and remote work is so essential as part of the equation for making that possible. And you need to make it really more transparent that there's going to be a lot of elder care workers or people caring for others, not just children at your workplaces. Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you. Ed, any last thoughts?
I love Paula's impulse to applaud the caregivers. And I'm just to make a little kudos to leaders that are paving this new way. And one little quick story I want to share is Tim Ryan, who is the head of PwC, the giant professional services company. During the pandemic, he once took a Zoom call in his daughter's bedroom. And he acknowledged in this Zoom call that his family was wrestling with mental health challenges. And to me, that was kind of signaling that here he is, a caregiver, a father. He's like acknowledging his daughter, this role he plays as a father, and acknowledging that care is needed in his family. And I think if we can take the lead from pioneers, brave leaders like him, we're going to get to a much better place.
Thank you both for an excellent conversation and those excellent closing remarks. I really appreciate it.